Hello, everyone, and welcome to this week's conversation on the YouTube Creators Hub podcast. My name is Dusty Porter, the host of the show. Welcome. If you're new, and if you're not new, glad to have you back. We are joined today by Jared Hatch from the Paper Melon YouTube channel. Jared does high-quality cinematic video reviews of toys and a whole bunch of fun things. And Jared's channel is so much fun that I got kind of on a rabbit hole, we do sometimes on YouTube, and I started watching all your desk setup and the different things that you did, and you're such a very high quality video editor because it's obviously what you used to do. You're now doing YouTube full time, so we'll definitely talk about all that. But Jared, how you doing today?
Doing good, Dusty. How you doing?
Doing fantastic. So let's just go ahead and just jump into it. So give us the origin story of the Paper Melon YouTube channel. And maybe while you're doing that, why don't you tell us the reason why it's called Paper Melon?
Yeah, to avoid rambling, because we could be here all day because it goes back. It's a long one. I've been doing, creative work, and it kind of spun off of something that spun off of something that spun off of something, starting when I was 10 years old, starting with music production when I was a child, started, way back when, and doing it with my brother. And that evolved into motion graphics and animation. And eventually, kind of in the middle of that, around when I was 16 years old, there was a strange wedge in there of something super random, which is that I was really into origami. And it was kind of a random off track from just about everything else that I did, but specifically origami like flowers. I just called it floral origami. But yeah, it was something that I was really into, and I just loved how you could create entire compositions off of it, right? Because you make everyone's had a buddy of theirs make a paper crane, for example, and then it's on the counter and then it goes in the garbage the next day because there's nothing to do with it. But what I loved about florigami is that you could create these compositions out of it, and that you could put them in a vase and learn how to, create the right composures, and then they last longer than normal flowers. The problem was, at the time, as a kid, I felt that the YouTube tutorial space for origami flowers was so boring, which, now as an adult, I look back and I'm like, yeah, I mean, it's supposed to be instructive. But as a kid, I was like, it would be fun to enter the space and actually, as a niche, kind of make it interesting and fire it up a little bit. And so that's where I decided to create the YouTube channel. And so that's how it started, was an origami tutorial. And basically, I would sit down at maybe the first 30 seconds of the video, and I would just talk about the flower and say, here's why it's important, why I'm going to be making it. And then after that, I would jump into the tutorial. And as time went on, after 5, 6, 7 videos, I would start to kind of make jokes at the beginning of that video. And during that intro, I would use some sort of humor that I would just off the top of my head. And it was bad. It was cringy, but I thought it was hilarious and I really enjoyed it. And so, yeah, that as it progressed, what happened was like 4 or 5 videos in, every video, that intro segment where I was messing around, joking around, would get longer and longer, until I still remember it was one of the few comments that I had on my channel at the time. I got a comment around 8 videos in of some guy being like, dude, what are you talking about? Get to the tutorial. Nobody cares. And it shattered me, because that was like my whole identity. And it's what I thought made me unique. And I was like, nah, this guy doesn't know. Of course, I look back now and I wish I could have, he was valid because it was 100% true. But it did start, it kind of got me thinking what if I just separated this and kind of wrote my own comedy skit in the first place. And that was just a separate thing that I did. And so I did that and went out, wrote one for a couple months and filmed it with friends and released it on my channel. And it was so bad, but I loved it at the time, and, made me realize that I love comedy. And so through the next couple years, from 16 to about 18, I would then go back to doing origami tutorials, 3 of those, and then 2 comedy sketches, and then 1 tutorial, and then 2 comedy sketches. And then eventually, after a couple of years, I had stopped the tutorials and was full-time on the comedy aspect, which then one thing led to another that led into the non-scripted time of my life where I wanted to be a little bit more sincere, which then led into now, where there was always Transformers and toy content sprinkled and dinging. And I kind of only decided to commit to that specific niche once I found my stride and figuring out how to make it cinematic and make it as professional as possible, because I didn't just want to do it like everybody else. So, that's the gist of it.
Yeah, and I think the unique thing about your channel is that I remember when I got into technology tutorials early on 13 years ago, and I realized that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to do screencasts and show people how to use technology. And
Right.
I kind of like you thought to myself, well, this technology tutorial space is just awful. Now, I didn't think, oh, it's boring. I thought it's just awful, right? Like whenever you want to learn how to use some technology, you'd have to watch some guy from wherever. You couldn't understand what he's saying. The music was blaring. It was just terrible. You couldn't understand where the mouse was. It was just, there were so many bad things, and I wanted to
I got to make sure we're actually on the same page here. What year are we talking about? Because I need to know if I need to be sitting here going, yeah, true, or if it's, no, I was 3. I have no idea.
No, yeah, you're much younger than me. So 13 years ago, I was, I've been married now almost 13 years. So
Congrats.
yeah, so it's one of the things to where, when I started on YouTube, things were so different. But exactly what you're talking about, I wanted to innovate. I wanted to do different things. So
Right.
you took kind of your love for comedy, which I love your you can tell you still do your sketches inside of your toy reviews.
Oh,
so
very much.
You really have niched down. So can you talk about the importance of the channel now has almost 110,000 subscribers. You've got a very engaged community. Can you talk about just the importance of niching down, and once you've kind of landed on your thing, like you're not just doing toy reviews, right? Like you're doing toy reviews in a very funny way, in a very high quality, honestly, toy reviews, just like tutorials, probably have no business being that well done and edited, right? So you've niched down to a very deep kind of level. So can you speak on that and the importance of that and the growth of your channel?
Yeah. And it's kind of funny you mentioned, tuning down to what you do, because it's an important part of, I think, being successful overall. But it's tough because there's no real advice to just get people there, because you got to kind of find it yourself. But yeah, I've gotten that before. And it's one of my favorite compliments to get is the people who almost will like make comments on my channel, almost sarcastically being like, dude, these have no right to be this good.
Yes.
Where do you get the gall? Those are very funny. I appreciate that, because that's exactly what I'm squarely aiming for, was, creating something that doesn't exist, which is getting tougher and tougher to do. It's getting pretty
100%.
challenging to create something that isn't around, by the millions of videos. And so, yeah, very much it's something that I strive towards, is kind of honing in my niche in that, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does make sense. And you're exactly right. It is hard to do new and innovative things. Most things now are just basically iterations of things that have already been done, and just you improving them and kind of putting your own spin on it. One of my favorite comments was exactly what I just told you. I did a Notion tutorial showing people how to use Notion and kind of how to run their creator business with Notion. And a guy commented, he said exactly that. He said, man, this tutorial has no business being this high quality. He was like, your audio sounds so good. And I was like, you have no idea how important that is to me. So understanding what you're good at. And for you, you are really technical and really good with your edits. And I was watching a video of yours a few hours ago, and you did this thing where you had like this earbud and it bounced all over the room and it hit your keyboard and it ordered something for you. And then you cut to the thing coming in your room. Can you talk about that? How far do you think your editing chops have gotten you? Because we live in a world where YouTube has changed over to where people like the more lower, or kind of not lower quality, but like lightly edited type stuff. So how has that kind of gotten you to where you are?
That's actually something that I've really had to focus on, is finding a balance. And, that is subjective, so everyone's going to feel differently about it. But I spend probably an obsessive amount of time in the edit figuring out how to make things as quickly paced as possible, but, avoiding what feels like just an overly attentive, like ADHD edit. And so during that specific review, you could call it, of those figures from that video, was one of the most challenging in regards to pacing that I've ever had, because the joke of the video, and I try and have a different running joke for each video. I don't carry over running jokes. I try and rewrite things and keep it as fresh as possible. And so the running joke for that video was basically using just some randomly unusually fast-paced edits to get kind of a comedy beat across. And so kind of in the case that you mentioned where the earbud I was using, I was joking, or I was saying like, oh yeah, I don't need to buy this figure. And then the earbud slipped out, and then you watch it jump around everywhere and hit the mouse and the keyboard and clicks things on eBay, types up the thing, and then it buys it for me. And I pretend to be annoyed for a second. Part of the joke, and then the running joke throughout the video, is how unnaturally fast it suddenly is that the pacing goes from just regular storytelling to just boom cut. And I do it a couple other times to kind of convey that message. And it was tough. It's really tough to figure out how to do it so fast, but just at the perfect pacing and framing that people catch it visually and aren't confused. And I think a very kind of a specific example of what I take inspiration from, it's a very general example. It's not, unique or anything, but I think Apple, for example, when it comes to their ads, especially when you look at the late 2010 ads, what they would do is ridiculously fast-paced edits where they would flash text on screen, but it would be one word at a time, and then it would boom, boom, and it would say, you're not ready for this, but it would be, you're not ready for this. And the way the text would be moving and flashing with the new phone that they had, what specifically fascinated me and always has about these isn't necessarily that they're my favorite ads in the world. It's specifically that they are so unnaturally fast. And for some reason, I can read it almost without trying. It's almost like somebody's talking to me, because the way that they frame it, it is an art to figure out how you frame the text on screen to lead the eyes to where it needs to be, so that it is so fast, but it's almost like somebody's talking to you. You can read it as fast as they're showing it because they know how to do it. If it's all over the place or not perfectly done, you're going to be going, wait, what did it say? I didn't read it in time. What happened? And so that was one of the direct inspirations when I was watching this or when I was creating this, was how can I toggle that line of just barely keeping the pace and the framing and film it in a way where it's just fast enough to where you blink and it's done, but you never wondered, you weren't confused, you knew exactly what happened,
Yeah, video editing is an art. It really is an art form. Being able to convey something visually and take clips, mixture of, say, moving picture, video, pictures, audio, sound effects, and really do it to a way to where, that's the thing about when I watched that video of yours, I was just enthralled with the sound design, the audio of your voice, and the combination of that, and how quickly your edits and cuts were. Oftentimes, I'm kind of I shy away from videos like that now because I feel like I get dizzy, but yours wasn't that way. It was paced in a way, and the cuts were made in a way to where it was very nice. Now, how much time do you spend on average in an edit for one of your videos now? Because there are pretty big gaps between your uploads, so like how I assume a video of that nature takes quite a while. So how much are you like spending time-wise in edit?
Oh gosh, my goodness, too long at this point. I am at a point where I gotta calibrate.
Yeah.
I gotta figure out, I gotta get like the personal and work balance in check, but a pretty crazy amount of time. You're right. It takes, I post like once every between 1 to 3 months at this point, and there's no way to really convey this to people, nor is it necessarily crucial that they understand, but there are not breaks between that. I am working on the next one the second this one starts. So I'd say the edit itself, I'd say if I really buckle down, and like the last week before release, I always fall into a habit of working like 20 to 24-hour days. And so I would say back to back, probably about 3 to 4 weeks ish in the edit, starting out with those 8 to 10-hour days. And then slowly, as I get more entrenched in it and up to release date and sometimes sponsorship deadlines, a little bit crazier hours.
Let's talk in the perspective of beginners here. I work with a lot of creators. I do YouTube coaching and do some podcast coaching as well. And oftentimes a lot of what I hear is one of the things that people hate the most is the editing. They think to themselves, well, the barrier to entry is too high, whether it be monetary or just time consuming, whatever it may be. What are some tips that you have for people trying to get better? Maybe not even people starting, but those starting and trying to get better at video editing. What are some like quick pointers and tips you can give them to make it more efficient and make them a better editor for their channel?
I'll give two tips if that's okay. Part one, part two, and the first one will be as practical as possible. It's very specific because I like specific advice. Unless you plan on working, as a full-time video editor with other teams in the future, don't do Adobe. Don't do it. Get invested in another platform. And I only say that because it's a tough thing to get entrenched into and it is expensive. And I've had a lot of creators and newer up and coming artists ask me that and say, what do you use? And my advice is that, use something you can afford. And realistically, almost nobody can afford Adobe. And I don't think even if they could, that they should use it. I would say like Final Cut Pro, DaVinci Resolve, I learned, and it is free and it is incredible. And so that's a little bit more technical is if you're trying to really take a step above, if you're using like CapCut right now and you're trying to know, hey, what's the next step to take? My most direct advice, DaVinci Resolve. You'll need a decent computer to run it, but it's a beautiful, up-to-date program that is too good to be true. It is free, and there's a paid version that even me as a professional video editor, I've never needed any of the features up because they're like cloud features. And so you can pay for it, and if you do, it's a one-time fee instead of Adobe's monthly.
Can I interrupt you and ask you a question? Someone who's used all of them, because I like to do tutorials on all the different software because that's kind of what I do, but why would you say shy away from Adobe other than obviously the financial reasons behind it? I mean, I don't want to go too deep into this here, but why would you shy away from it? Curiosity, because I do like Final Cut is probably my preferred one. I use really ScreenFlow because I do mainly screencast, but that's beside the point. Why would you say that?
So, Adobe, it's really become a monopoly. And here's the thing, I'm going to be pretty blunt. There's a lot of major recent like ethical issues with Adobe that have come out. If I'm being totally blunt, I not concerned. I mean, yeah, it sucks, but it is what it is. Like most companies are doing something or another. That's not necessarily the reason to shy away from it, because if it's the best option, you got to do the best option for you. The reason for me is actually specifically in regards to the performance of it. And because, 20, 30 years ago, Premiere Pro and Adobe and Illustrator and Photoshop capitalized the market and became this massive monopoly. They are the industry standard now. It is what everybody uses. And even if individual creators are starting to transition over, massive teams can't, because you can't just make a switch like that. Once you're locked into a system, it's tough. And they know that. And it has led to some of the most like software laziness I've ever seen, where there will be a bug that, I'm not kidding, I have gone days on my last laptop before I upgraded to a much nicer one and it was still a good laptop. It was a solid $1,500 like HP laptop. And I think where I snapped and I'm like, I can't do it. I'm learning DaVinci Resolve, even though I knew Premiere Pro so well. It has to be bad to get to that point. Yeah. And the point at which I got here was the day that in the middle of a video project, Premiere Pro crashed, I think 9 times.
Yeah.
And lost the work that I've been doing for the last 10 minutes up into that point, and I snapped. And I ended up going back to Premiere Pro because then I worked with a team as a video editor, and they did make some bug improvements, and I improved my computer. And there are specific reasons that I stick with Premiere Pro. The main one is the opportunity for keyboard shortcuts and the customization that it has there. But I wish I could have stuck with DaVinci Resolve. And the reason I advise it for new people is because I do this due to my habits and my workflow and my very specific niche of what I need that a vast majority of other creators do not need. And for them, they'll pay a lot less and be a lot happier with a less buggy program, if that makes sense.
Very well said. I've used all of them. I use Premiere as well, solely because it works with the other programs that I use, like Adobe Audition. I do a lot of voiceover work for clients and stuff. And when I do, Audition is what I learned on. And it's it's one of the kind of old habits die hard. There are other things out there, but I just find that when you're comfortable with something, it just kind of works for you. But I do love DaVinci. I love the guys over there. I love, there's even other, even lower freeware out there that's not as in-depth as DaVinci. And then there's, Final Cut, which if you're a Mac, obviously, and then there's some other obviously things for screencasting, ScreenFlow, Camtasia, all those things. So it's
And
good to
that's
hear,
actually something,
hear you say
and
that.
that's something in Final Cut. I like that you mentioned that too, because I don't have experience with Final Cut. It scares me. The whole format of
Yeah.
you hear everybody talk about the different way the timeline works terrifies me.
Yeah,
And so I haven't, but whenever people are asking, that is my first thing is if you have a Mac, especially one past 2020 with an M1 chip in it,
yeah.
I mean, you got to consider if you're starting fresh, because it is so optimized to work with a Mac that it's a no-brainer.
Yeah. And as far as like just learning video editing, I mean, it's kind of like anything else, isn't it? Where you can just go on YouTube and when you got free time, get an iPad. Like I like to take notes on my iPad or a notepad or whatever and just start taking notes, man. Start learning, right? YouTube University, just get on there and learn all you can. Yeah. So it really is, the opportunity is out there for, if you want to get better, you certainly can get better. And I highly recommend you go over to Jared's channel and take a look at some of his videos. I mean, the edits are just super, super clean. So that's one of the things I just want to compliment you on. All right, let's talk now about one thing that you wish you would have known sooner. Like now that you're 7-8 years into this thing as a whole, right? There's been some kind of, I'm sure you've had some times where you may haven't uploaded as frequently as you do now. But with that being said, what is something you wish you would have known sooner that you think could have helped you grow even quicker? I know this one's tough sometimes, but when you look back
Yeah.
at,
So, and here's the thing. You know, I've kind of wondered something along those lines in the past is, now that I've been doing it for long enough and it took so long for the algorithm to pick up my channel. Now that I have, what could I tell myself before that I know now? And, I, it's not super helpful, but I've just found that there really isn't much. There isn't necessarily anything that I would tell myself. There's things that I could advise other people that would really help for them. But for me at the time, if I were to go back now and, if I were to tell myself something, or if, I were to want somebody to tell me something, there's really nothing that anybody could have told me that I wouldn't have still had to go through to learn that, except for me. I could have told myself and I would have listened to myself. But that's the thing. If I went back now, I look at my old videos, from almost a decade ago and I cringe, they're painful. And I've, gone as far as to some of them maybe privated and kept as many up as I can, but it's just kind of how the cookie crumbles. And if I were to go back, it would be so tough not to just tell myself, don't be cringy. Like, your humor sucks. But it's really important that I didn't hear that, because if I did hear that and I didn't learn from where I was, I wouldn't be where I am now. And there are a lot of people don't talk about this. A lot of people talk about their inspirations, which is good. That's a positive thing. But I think it's also important to talk about I don't know what you want to call them, negative inspirations, the things where there are parts of my script that I will write and then read it back in my head and go, no. And then I'll delete it because it'll give me deja vu of a really bad joke I would have made years ago. And those are improvements that we make. And so I don't think, to be honest with you, there's such a massive component of the algorithm and things that you don't have control over that I am really glad that I had the experience leading up to I am now to have what I have and to learn from what I learned.
Yeah, I think it doesn't matter who you are, what channel you are. Even Mr. Beast talks about it, one of the biggest creators on the platform, right? You have to put in the time. You have to keep uploading the videos. You have to learn. And for you, it was your humor, right? You had to improve that. Like for me, it was my delivery. I look at my delivery for some of my older videos and I'm like, what was I doing? Why was I speaking? I don't even sound like myself, right? So, you have to kind of go through those things to get to a point to where you can kind of, you're not on the top of the mountain, but you're getting there, right? Like you actually can find some success and have some attributes that do, take your channel to the next level. Speaking of failures, can you talk about maybe one or two or one in particular that you can think about that's kind of made an impact on the channel along the way, as far as like just something that you've done or something you tried to do that just completely flopped?
Are we talking about in regards to like full projects or like even specific things or
specifics, like things you tried with the YouTube channel, a specific project? It doesn't matter. Just anything as a creator that you're just like, man, that flopped, but you learned from it.
Oh gosh, how much time do you have? I'm trying to figure out, because I have so many, what would be actually helpful for people to hear. Actually, screw it. We'll go with an entertaining one. If you get some information out of this, whoever's watching, great. But I learned as my channel was really kind of hitting its stride and blowing up, so to speak, there's a whole coping process of mentally adjusting, of this surreal reality of I'm here, this is working. And especially for me, because I've been doing this since I was a conscious human being, basically, more of my life than has been doing this thing. And you just get very used to the, whatever, the lack of success, and you're doing it because you're passionate about it. And so when it actually hits that stride, my goodness, it's very surreal.
Yeah.
But while I was going through this adjustment period of the ups and downs and the negatives you don't expect from your channel, really, and getting thousands of comments a week, I made a video, and I still love this video. And it was, still one of the starting ones when my channel was getting bigger, was about camera transformers. And there was 3 or 4 of them, I think. And I think the video was called "These Cameras Are More Than Meets the Eye." And in that, I was still, it's fun to look back and see how humor subtly changes. And I very much still find what I joke about in there funny, but there was a bit in there that taught me a lot by audience reactions, where people very much liked the video and loved it, but I would keep getting occasional recurring comments. And you can sometimes, that's like where you learn, is like the recurring comments of this one negative thing is what people are pinpointing.
Yes.
And you try and sometimes tell yourself, I don't care, but you got to learn from things. And even if not, it sticks there. You remember that the next time you're writing a script.
Yeah.
And this little segment was me just using some sarcasm, and it was kind of making a joke about millennials. And the way that sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just laughing. This is great.
The way that I phrased it, in hindsight, I could see why it's confusing, but it's where I've learned a valuable lesson, which is trying to figure out how to say this like in a non-condescending way. Not everybody processes humor the same.
That's right. Yeah.
And so the amount of people who, because if you don't like the joke, if you don't find it funny, if whatever it may be, totally fine. I get it. It may not be for you. But my weakness, my kryptonite in regards to like my pet peeve, I guess, is people who just flat out didn't get it and then get upset at something they didn't get. And so I would get a lot of Gen X and boomers commenting, being like, how could you talk to us like that? And I was so confused because I rewatched that joke 15 times. And I was like, I was defending you because millennials did a certain thing. And so, and even then it was in a lighthearted tone. And so I was very defensive at first, but after pinning a comment just from a guy who did understand and he explained it, it did help me move forward and learn, okay, if I can have, I don't want to be on the nose. I don't want to be cheesy and over the top. That's really something I'm particular about, is I don't want to beat a dead horse when it comes to a joke every time. I want to be subtle enough, but I got to be a little careful about how I articulate certain things so that people understand what it is I'm joking about.
That's also a story about the size of the platform, right? Because sometimes before you get big or before you get any attention online, you forget or you just don't realize the impact you can have when your voice gets out there. And everyone always wants to say, well, I want to be successful on YouTube. I want to do this. I want to do that. But oftentimes they just can't handle it. Like they just can't handle the fact of, hey, there's a ton of people watching me. I'll never forget, when my podcast, it started actually getting downloads and it became one of the bigger kind of content creation podcasts out there. And it still is. I'm so thankful for that because of the guests I've had like you. But the thing is that I get emails every week and obviously not all of them agree with me. And I've had to kind of thicken my skin. My wife, her skin is not as thick as mine, so I have to keep her away from the comment section. And a funny story, I've told this a couple of times before, early on in my YouTube journey, I'll never forget, I had a couple of videos that took off. I mean, they blew up, and I was showing people how to edit audio and how to use Audacity, which is a free audio recorder. And
it's what my brother and I used when we produced music a long time ago. It's what we started off with. Yeah,
sure. And those guys reached out to me early on, and they were like, "Hey, would you do some videos?" They didn't pay me, but they're like, "Hey, I think this would be a good thing for your channel." Yeah, sure, absolutely. So I did, and in the edit, when I hit export, I forgot that when I recorded my audio in mono, because that was just how I recorded it at the time. It was back then I had a Blue Yeti. This was a decade ago. And I'll never forget, there's one guy who commented, he said, my left ear really loved this video, because the audio was obviously only coming out when people would listen in headphones. And that was the most like upvoted comment. It got the most responses, and that video went on to get 2 or 3 million views, right, over the lifetime of the video. And so, with that being the case, every time someone would comment that or respond to that, it just ingrained in my head. You can guarantee that I never forgot
never
to
gonna happen
change
again.
that setting, right? So you do learn some things, and as you fail, you're going to get back up, and failing is part of it. I do want to transition a little bit into monetization. You mentioned, we've talked about from the top that you were a video editor, day job kind of as your full-time gig, but now you're doing YouTube full-time. So you've made that transition. That's great. Talk about how you make money as a creator, and on average, being that you only upload once every, few months or so, how do you sustain it? What are your averages, and how do you make money?
Right off the bat, I will say it's kind of one of the many things that is a struggle of figuring out is when you hone down the type of the niche content that you're gonna make, a lot of that is figuring out a balance of, once it becomes full time, that's your income. And so it's
Yes.
no longer do it when I want to. A job's a job. Even if I'm grateful to have it and it's a blessing, it's like you said, there's the ups and downs. There's the comments that you think way too much up at night about and got to get thick skin with. But then, there's also just the balance of, how do you maintain passion for something when it becomes something that you got to make money for? And I think that was especially adjustment for me to make because again, I've been doing this for so much of my life that I never fully calibrated for what that would be like once I have to do it. And I was ready to mentally, I wanted to get to where I even had that opportunity, and I'm grateful to have it, but it's something you just can't know until you're there. And so when it comes to monetization, I don't post frequently, and I'm very grateful and very fortunate that I've kind of, I think, built a platform where my audience expects that, but I've noticed so many upsides of it as well. And I don't necessarily say that this is fit for everybody or that everybody should do it the way I do it because every type of content's different. But what I've found works that I'm grateful about the more infrequent and long-term posting that I do is, for one thing, I love the event around it, and I think we all have had that person on our YouTube feed, on our recommended, who shows up every day with a new video. And it is so tedious. And that right there makes you not subscribe, or maybe makes you unsubscribe, where you're like, it's almost like spam posting, where it's just like somebody in your email thread constantly. And I do think there's a value to limiting your posts to some degree and actually, making sure there's something to say before saying it. But mine is a little bit more of an extreme condition. So I'm grateful that when I do post, at least relative to my follower count, that, because I try and reach to a general audience and not, I want to address the fans of what I'm talking about, toys and Transformers, but I also want to keep it open for people who don't know that, who can just hop in, who have never talked about that thing and still understand what I'm saying and not feel like they're getting lost in the weeds of something. And because I try and keep it, catered to people who can feel welcome to something, I've noticed that the viewership on average is way higher than anything else within this genre. And that allows me to focus in on making super high quality content. And then it's kind of a cycle. And then I think from that, people then know that whenever they see that the Paper Melon label below a video and that was just posted, there's a certain like dopamine rush. There's an excitement of hopefully, they know that it will be quality and that it's worth watching, even if it's maybe not a topic that they are specifically interested in.
And your income is primarily ad revenue. Is that correct?
Ad revenue and AdSense from YouTube monetization.
Yes.
It is. I would say that's that's one of the things that suffers most, I will say, from the revenue. When you've posted this many videos, kind of on the monetization side, it stays up pretty consistently and has ups and downs, but the sponsorships it suffers a little bit more because that's on a per video basis. That's not a frequent income. It's paycheck per video. And it's one of the things that I've actively decided to take a hit on making less than I could. Is I want to make sure I produce high quality videos. And I've seen that pay off to a degree as well, because I've gotten to the point over the last 5 months where a lot of sponsors have started to recognize that when I do a sponsorship segment, I put in a lot of work. There's a lot of transition work, and things like the earbud segment falling out of my ear, it was not a sponsored segment, but I used a sponsored product that led eventually into something, and the company was just so grateful for that. And so that allows me to also leverage price a little bit. But I would say if I had to put a percentage to it, I would say probably right now, about 65% of my income is the AdSense monetization revenue, and then about 35% is the sponsorship. And I hope to get that aspect of it up.
Evened out, right? And if you don't mind sharing, like, what's an average you're getting per video for a sponsor?
So right now, it's a tough world because, you know, being a YouTuber is being not a video creator anymore. It's being in everything and learning how to negotiate. And I'm very grateful that I was, you know, raised by parents who taught me how to speak well, and I was, you know, well educated so that I was able to develop these skills. But no matter what, it is tough to join in this world and know what the starting bracket is. And so it took, it's kind of an off track, so sorry, but it took months of doing research because nobody wants to answer specific money questions. And so many people on Reddit will say, well, somebody will ask a question and will ask something like, I have whatever 30,000 subscribers and I make this many views on average. You know what? I have no idea, where do I even start with this company that just came to me with an offer? Is this, you know, and everyone will respond and say, it depends on your situation. No, but you got to know where to start. And that's very true. Is no, are we talking 8 cents or are we talking $10,000? We need a bracket. So at this point, I think I'm averaging, depending on the video and the topic and how badly I want to sponsor, anywhere between $2,500 to about $4,000 per sponsor for about 60 seconds.
Yeah, and that's a good number. It's about knowing your value too. You know, I just recently did with AI being as big as it is, you know, I've had so many companies reach out to me and they want me to feature them on the channel or do a video review, and they're offering me all kinds of money. And sponsorship's kind of strange in that you do want money, you want to pay the bills and you want to eat and all those things, but you also want to provide your audience with something that could be valuable for them. And by doing that, you'll have a better response from the sponsor. And so I'm kind of very picky, and it sounds like you are too. But I just recently had a conversation with a potential sponsor for my podcast, and the guy told me afterwards, it was a older gentleman. He's been in his position for a long time, and we were off record. And he told me the hardest thing about what we just did is you or whoever saying the first number, right? Whatever that starting number is. And he said, I'm going to be honest with you. I'm going to give you one more chance. He said, you gave me a number, and this is a real conversation. The sponsor will be on this podcast in the fall. And he said to me, I'm going to give you another chance. I'm going to be completely honest with you. We would have gave you double what you ask. So whatever my starting number was, he said, I would have given you double. And it's about, as a creator, you've got to know your value. What are you worth, right? What is, in oftentimes we don't like to say a number or a high number because we think, well, we're thinking too much about ourselves, or we think too highly about ourselves. No.
Yeah, you don't want to be arrogant.
You put the work in,
you don't want
to
feel that way. I get that. Yeah.
So, Jared, you've been an awesome guest. Again, I want to encourage you, people listening to this, Paper Melon, Paper Melon, Melon. It will be linked in the show notes. Jared is a killer video editor, and his videos are quite funny. So I would encourage you to go check them out. Jared, thank you so much for joining me today, and we'll talk to you next time.